in case you missed it, national automaker Proton has just launched its first ever all-electric product, and it of course also Malaysia's first all-electric model we're talking about here, the Proton E.MAS 7. After being on sale for a couple of months, the E.MAS 7 has garnered rave reviews among EV enthusiasts and daily customers alike, citing that this is one of the best, if not the best, entry-level EVs for the masses out there. But in my personal opinion, I think the E.MAS 7 is a slight missed opportunity by Proton, given that the localization efforts taken to make this car is not as extensive as other Geely-based products by Proton. For example, this thing here, because this is of course the Proton X70, and this is the latest facelifted 2025 version of this SUV. And after being many years into our market, the X70 has evolved from just a Geely rebadge into a more Proton-ish car, so much so that it really feels more Proton than Geely as it is. So in today's video, we're going to highlight what Proton got right in localizing the X70 and what does the E.MAS 7 can do to improve in the near future, and see which one is the best C7 SUV for you and your family. My name is Mukhlis. Welcome back to Caricarz. Alright, let's start with the X70 facelift, because after lots of minor changes in years, Proton has finally given this a proper facelift, and as a result, it looks more localized and more Malaysian than it used to be. Okay, starting at the front here, you can see it comes with this new front grille design featuring Proton signature song cap with pattern. This is the same pattern we've seen on both the X90 and the S70, so this is Proton's new design language identity, and it looks very befitting in this facelifted X70. Also new here, if you notice, is actually the headlight. The LED headlights gets a very different shape from the pre-facelift model. It actually looks the same as the Geely Boyu Pro in China, so the headlights is not really that localized, but as you can see, thanks to this new front grille design, the overall of the car looks pretty decent. Of course, it still uses the same taillight design, and then the rear design is unchanged compared to the previous model, but it also rides on this new 19-inch alloy wheels for the Premium X variant still. So overall, you can see in terms of design, Proton has done a very good job in implementing some localized design and local design elements inside the X70, so much so it looks less like a Geely and more like a proper Proton vehicle. Right now, moving on to the E.MAS 7, you can see in terms of design, it doesn't get that much localization as compared to the X70 facelift. So as a result, the E.MAS 7 looks very identical to its Geely twin. Of course, we're talking about the Geely Galaxy E5. In fact, the only differences between the E.MAS 7 and the Geely E5 lies on the brand, because this, of course, it comes with this new Proton E.MAS logo at the front, so as the back, and of course, it also comes with the E.MAS 7 nameplate at the rear here. So, and not to forget, it also rides on this new 19-inch alloy wheels with Proton badge instead of Geely one. So those are the only notable difference. The rest, it looks the same. It's got the same body style, same headlights and taillights unit, all pretty much the same. But you also notice that we actually didn't get all the specification and all the equipment just like the China spec E5, because if you notice at the front here, it doesn't come with the illuminated front grille we've seen at China's E5. So instead, we just get this plain front grille. Same goes to the L-shaped LED DRL at the front here. We don't get the DRL, but instead the China market gets the illuminated DRL here. So it is quite a shame, so that you can see we actually didn't get all the bells and equipment just like the E5, but I think that's a missed opportunity, because I would think Proton could have implemented their new Songcat with design in the illuminated front grille of the E.MAS 7, provided that it comes with the same illuminated front grille unit as the E5. But overall, the car still looks nice. It looks very futuristic. It doesn't look like any other Proton models you and I know, so it is really an eye-turner, so much like it has really turned on many EV buyers to get this thing. But one thing people mistaken for the E.MAS 7 actually is in terms of its size, because although in photos and in videos this car doesn't look that big, it is quite big actually, because in terms of dimensions, it is actually measured slightly larger compared to the X70. So this goes to show that the E.MAS 7 is a really proper C-segment SUV. But of course, in terms of design, it doesn't look like any Proton you and I know, but still, it looks pretty okay. Alright, so now we move inside the facelifted X70, and boy do this car get some key distinctive adib. Okay, for example, at the front dash here, you can see it still sports this very conventional layout featuring lots of buttons, especially for the aircon and everything here. But if you notice that there's some new loops, including this Songcat with pattern at the front dash here that is also houses the car's ambient lighting system, which looks quite nice. And this is, you can see localization part has been done quite right. But more importantly, for the X70 facelift here is actually the head unit here. Not only is larger, it also now supports wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Finally, a Proton car with both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. This is the first model to get the update, and according to Proton, they will soon update this thing to another model in the future. Okay, in terms of functionality, everything, it works alright. The connectivity is quite fine, but it can get laggy at times. I mean, of course, given the car's age, that's not big of a price, but okay, at least it is still usable. But other than that, in terms of the layout and everything, it feels very familiar. And I think the more traditional buyers are actually going to appreciate the X70 here more compared to the more futuristic EMAS 7 there, because you can see layout is very traditional. But one thing I also like about this car is actually not only it comes with this large panoramic sunroof, but it also uses a lot of premium materials. I mean, you've got a lot of soft touch materials on the door cuts and everything, but the seats, let me tell you, this is one of the best material seats used for this price segment, because they are using pure Nepal leather here. This is not fake leather, this is not synthetic, this is pure Nepal leather finished in this very unique. This is not black, actually this is grey color, and it feels quite nice. Of course, the front seats are both powered and ventilated, so goes to show that in terms of tech amenities, the X70 facelift is now on par with some of its Chinese competitors out there, but also almost on par with the EMAS 7. So overall, the improvement is quite okay. It's not too much, but it is substantial to say the least. Alright, now we're inside the Proton EMAS 7, and this is where the EMAS 7 shines against the X70 facelift, because just look at it, it's not only the cabin is tech-rated, it's also quite more spacious and more comfortable compared to the X70, although it features this very typical Chinese car layout, which some people not really big a fan of. But I think after driving so many Chinese EVs, this feels quite at home, honestly. Okay, starting with the front here, you still get this small digital instrument cluster, but more importantly, at this price, you still get a full color head-up display, which is something rare to see in this price segment. And of course, you get this large center infotainment display. We'll talk about this later, but of course, still no Android Auto and Apple CarPlay for now, because they promise that will update later this year. Okay, let's talk about other things first. Okay, in terms of layout also, I kind of like this layout because it feels like the smart hashtag one, where the front dash level is quite low, so it makes drivers can see at the front of the car very easily. So in terms of field of view of this car, it's quite nice. And of course, in terms of amenities, in terms of fit and finish, it feels quite premium. Certainly slightly more premium compared to the X70, shall I say, because you've got lots of soft touches, including on the front here, the front dash and everything, but you still got some hard plastic part like this fake wood veneers at the center console. But it's still okay, it doesn't look or it doesn't feel cheap like many other cheaper Chinese seats out there. But the seats, I think, is one of the best, if not the best in the market segment, because not only they are powered, both the front seats are powered and ventilated, and they can fully recline, so you can technically transform the EMAS 7 cabin into a lounge space for two. But unfortunately, for the passenger drivers, for the passenger front seat here, it doesn't come with Ottoman support, just like we saw on the GLE 5, so that's a bit of a bummer. But other than that, it feels comfortable. The faux leather material feels quite nice. It certainly feels more premium or on par with the Nepal leather seats on the X70, but it feels alright. So overall, of course, not to forget, you got this very weird looking steering wheel. At first it looks pretty weird because the shape, it looks very pretty square-ish. It looks like hexagonal a bit, but after using it, it feels quite okay. The turning radius is also quite nice, so there's not much to complain. You still got some buttons, and of course you also got this massive dial here to control the volume, and just some small buttons for the aircon. Not many, but the weird thing about this car is actually the window switch, because they use the same window switches we see on the GLE 5, so it can get a bit of a used to for you to use it for the first time, but afterward it's quite okay. So overall, I have to say the EMAS 7 cabin, it certainly feels and looks more premium compared to the X70. So of course, there's not much localization needed here, because the cabin just feels quite right for our climate. I mean, you even got the ventilated seat, so that's a plus for me. So overall, the cabin, it feels quite decent. Alright, now for the infotainment here, you can see the screen is quite large, and according to Proton, the resolution is actually at 2.5K, which is quite decent. Actually, it's more resolution. It's got more resolution compared to my PC monitor. But this hardware is actually built in collaboration between Geely and Meizu. Yes, Meizu, the phone brand. So it uses the Flyme OS, which is, I think, it's quite okay. It doesn't, of course, it's not as intuitive or as engaging as something like the Google OS we tried in the Volvo, but it's still okay as far as native OS for an EV concerned. Okay, of course, we still don't have Android Auto Apple CarPlay, but as you can see, there's still a shortcut menu here, so meaning that it's coming soon according to Proton. But you still got built-in apps. I mean, you got Spotify, you can just play music, and you also even get your own app store where you can download some of the apps. Like you also got gaming app with Candy Blasting. So there are not many apps here, but it goes to show that this hardware can support multiple apps. So in future, we might get more updates on that. But other than that, in terms of navigation also, I kind of like the menu because the built-in map here is quite okay. The navigation is quite straightforward. I mean, of course, it's not as engaging or intuitive as something like Google Maps or Waze, but it's still usable. But you also get the same thing as the smart #1 car with S74. Of course, we got the EV charging location list and everything, and you even got the charging map here where it shows the estimated range you get and how far you can travel with the current remaining battery charge here. You can see even at just less than 80%, I still can go straight to Ipoh without stop for charging. So this is the same thing that we've seen in the Smart, but I have to say, in terms of the UI and everything, I think the Smart one is much nicer in terms of it's more user-friendly compared to this, but it's still usable, it's there, and it's quite good to see. But other than that, you got 360 camera, which is quite nice. And the thing about this screen, yes, most of the settings and everything hidden inside here, but you still got some shortcut buttons. As you can see down here, you get the phone shortcut, you got the shortcut for your music app, which is of course Spotify, and you got the climate control function. Just click here and opens up the climate control thing. And for when you're driving, you can just press here to access the quick menu, just to change the driving setting. For example, you can change the driving mode and everything here. And of course, you can also just slide the screen down here to get notification tree. You can just change the driving mode, you can adjust the brightness and everything. You can even open up the tailgate and of course activate the ventilation seat and all. So there are some shortcuts here, but it's okay. It's not perfect to entirely replace physical buttons and control, but it's there, so it's quite okay. So overall, my experience using the Flyme OS system here is quite okay as far as native OS system goes. It's quite alright. There's nothing much to complain about. Of course, you would want Android Auto CarPlay, but I have to complain. One of the complaints is actually there are no split screen modes. Like for example, if you open up your music app and if you want navigation, you can just use the navigation full on the screen, and you got no information about the songs playing and whatnot. Unlike in Android Auto CarPlay, you got the split view and everything, which is quite intuitive to you, but not this one. Maybe that can be improved with software updates and all. But overall, it's quite nice. But one thing I really love about this car is actually the sound system, because the Flyme OS is tied down to the 18-speaker Flyme sound system, which is, I think, one of the best, if not the best, especially for this price range, and the sound quality is very good. Let's have a look at this. Right now we're at the rear seat space of the EMAS 7, and let me tell you, space is definitely abundant here. As you can see, I got plenty of legroom, I've got tons of headroom, and space is definitely not an issue here. So actually, if you see the floor is almost flat. And the fun fact about the EMAS also, unlike many other EVs out there, the floor position is actually quite low. It's not as tall as many other Chinese EVs out there. So meaning that your sitting position has not been compromised. And I have to say, thanks to its very wide seat and this almost flat floor, you can just put 3 adults at the back seat here in a very comfortable manner. And one thing I also like about the seat, actually the position, because you can see it's a bit more reclined than the standard. So meaning that the position the sitting position is very comfortable. So for long distance travel, I have to say this is a very comfortable car for you and your family. And of course, in terms of amenities, you got this very large panoramic sunroof that goes all the way to the back, and you also got dedicated aircon vents here. You got USB charging ports here, but more importantly about the EMAS 7 is actually the storage spaces, because according to Proton and Geely, they have installed up to 33 storages and cubbies inside the car. And you can see at the back here, you also get this secret storage down here at the center console. You can just pull it out and also there's a small space here for you to put your phones, and even below the seats here, if you press here and you pull here, you also got the secret storage for you, so you can store lots and lots of items inside here. And you also got very large storage space at the center console at the front. Even on the door cards also, you can put like at least 1 or 2 water bottles easily. So in terms of space utilization, I think the EMAS 7 easily outranks some of its segment rivals, and certainly it feels much more spacious and more practical compared to the Proton X70. Alright, so now in terms of boot space, so according to Proton, the EMAS 7 gets a pretty sizable boot space measuring about 461 liters. So on paper, it's actually slightly smaller compared to the Proton X70, which gets over 500 liters of boot space here. But I have to say, despite that, space is quite abundant here, because as you can see, well, it doesn't come with a tonneau cover, which is a bit of a bummer, but at the same time, it allows you to have a bit more flexibility in terms of space utilization. Of course, if you need more space, you can just fold it down the rear seats here. But if you open the secret flap here, you will be greeted with lots of spaces down here, certainly enough for you to store your charging cables. You can store your emergency tire packet, and you also got this deep storage down here, which I think you can even store like a small goat or something inside here if you want. But unfortunately, this being a front-wheel drive EV, you don't have any space for frunk. But I have to say, 461 liters is just enough for you and your family. Alright, so now when it comes to driving, in terms of power, I would say this is the segment where Proton doesn't really need to do a lot of localization on, because on by itself, the Geely single front motor setup rated at 215 horsepower and 320 Nm of torque is more than enough to power up the EMAS 7 here, especially for the car of this size, because according to Proton, this is their fastest accelerating car ever, because the EMAS 7 can do from 0 to 100 in just 7 seconds, which is quite fast compared to other Proton cars, obviously. But in reality, it doesn't feel like so, because of course this car is quite large, it's quite heavy, it's almost 1.8 tons in weight. So it feels quite subtle and quite soft, which is actually a good thing if you consider, because this is supposed to be an entry-level EV. So in terms of power gradient, for people who are not familiar with the EV instant torque, this is quite a good car for them to transition between combustion power to all electric, because like I said, it doesn't feel rapid. It is fast, don't get me wrong, it is fast. You can do overtakings, you can just do the acceleration, everything in a very easy manner, but it doesn't feel fast, if you know what I mean, because the car is big. And one thing also about this car is actually it comes in 3 driving modes. You got eco, you got normal or comfort, and then you got sport. In sport driving mode, you can adjust the steering setup to be a bit more on the heavier side, which is quite good, because that's a good thing about having electronic power steering system, is that modularity, that adjustment. But other than that, I would say yes, power is definitely suffice. There's nothing much to complain, but of course you cannot expect this car to go and accelerate like something like the Tesla Model 3 Performance, or even something like the Smart Brabos and whatnot. But for your daily usage, for your highway usage, I think it's more than ample power, because let's face it, 200 horsepower in a C7 SUV is quite a lot. Like for reference, even the X70 1.5 turbo engine only puts up about, I don't know, 170 horsepower plus. So this is actually much more substantial, much more potent than the X70. And of course, thanks to its large facade, it feels quite smooth, definitely much smoother than Proton's other 1.5 turbo powered cars, because there's a 3-cylinder engine, it can get quite rough in terms of smoothness and everything. But this one, it feels smooth. That's the magic of electrification. So overall, power is definitely not an issue, but just don't expect it to be as fast as your sports cars out there. But one thing I would say Proton have done quite right, but still not enough, but still quite right in the EMAS 7 is when it comes to ride and handling, because of course Proton is well known for their ride and handling department. They've been tweaking with lots of Geely cars, making it much better compared to their Chinese counterparts. And as you can see, it's evident in the latest X70 facelift, because Proton have tweaked this car for many years since its launch back in 2018. Now it's about, what, 7 years? So Proton has been tweaking this car for quite long, so much so that I think the X70 facelift is one of the best, if not the best, driving Proton SUVs in the market, because it has a perfect balance between comfort and dynamics, while at the same time, it feels quite engaging still, especially for an SUV of that size. But the same case actually can be applied slightly to the EMAS 7. Okay, first thing first, off the bat, it is not as nice or as engaging as the X70 facelift, mind you, because that's quite okay, acceptable, because given the short time, Proton barely had like half a year or not even a year with the EMAS 7 for them to tweak, to localize this thing. But I I would say I've driven the Geely E5, the China spec Geely E5, and I have to say the EMAS 7 definitely feels like a much better car to drive. Because the E5, it feels too soft, feels a bit too supple because of course it uses all the tunings from the Chinese market, so it's not very suitable for the road conditions in Malaysia. But for the EMAS 7, as far as what Proton has done in terms of localization, it feels much more refined, it feels much more planted in corners, but at the same time, you don't get the floatiness, the rebound, the soft dip and everything. It's less, but you can still feel the body roll. Obviously, of course, this is a tall riding SUV. You cannot escape that. You can still feel the body roll. You still can feel the floatiness, the weight, especially in corners. But at the same time, it just feels much nicer, much more confident, even compared to two of its Chinese adversaries on our market, especially the Atto 3. Because Atto 3, I think that's the biggest problem. The right air handling is just not fit for our market. But not the EMAS 7 so far. Even less than a year, Proton has really done a good job. But of course, this being Proton first EV, of course, they're still learning on the right end handling and the dynamics of an EV. But still, good job for Proton. Of course, you cannot expect this car still, again, to drive like a sports car. But even in this current condition, in terms of comfort, in terms of dynamics, it's quite balanced, it's quite nice. And of course, in terms of NVH also, it's quite okay. Of course, this being an EV, you don't get any engine loss and everything. But the Goodyear tire they use is actually okay. It's not too noisy. It's okay, but you also got wind noises are quite minimal, except when you drive above 100 kilometers per hour. That's where you start to hear all the winds. But overall, in terms of ride and dynamics, it is quite good. Good job, Proton. But I think in years to come, they can further perfecting this car for our market, just like what they did with the X70. And of course, the last thing we'll talk about the EMAS 7 is of course in terms of safety. Well, this being a Geely product, the latest Geely product perhaps, so it is no surprise that the EMAS 7 is packed and brim with all the latest ADAS function and safety you can think of. I would say the intelligent cruise control mode, which is the semi-pilot driving system this car has, actually maybe the best in its market again compared to its Chinese made, because let's face it, because the Atto 3 is an aging product, because we still don't get the God's Eye ADAS for our market. So in terms of intelligent cruise control and everything, the Proton EMAS 7 is a much better product with ADAS. Same goes to other functions. The blind spot monitoring is quite good. The rear cross traffic alert is a godsend, especially if you're driving out of a blind spot, which is quite good. But of course, this being a motor car, you also find some annoying safety things, like for example, the speed limit function, the warning sound can get quite annoying at times, but you can just turn it off. But of course, you need to turn it off every time you turn on the car, so there's a bit of a bummer as well. But of course, you also got another annoying bits like, you know, like the lane keeping assist, the emergency lane keeping, which is of course supposed to help you, but given the condition of our roads, it's not working 100% of most of the time, because it really relies on the how clear is the lines on the road, because of course this is Malaysia, not all roads are perfect in condition. So there's that. But other than that, I have to say, not much to complain safety wise. Yes, good things that you can actually turn off many of these annoying functions if you want, if you choose to do so. But even if it's existing like this, it's quite fortunate. And I also like the fact that the head-up display actually displays all the ADAS function and even the navigation, so it is quite helpful as well. Okay, of course, next in terms of ergonomics, I've already talked about how the field of view of this car is quite clear, because that is thanks to the lower level of the front desk, so you can see the front of the car very clearly. So parking with this car shouldn't be an issue despite its larger size. Of course, you still got like 360 camera system and everything for you to help with parking. And then the fact that they still retain some physical controls, like for example to adjust your mirrors, to the door locks, to some of the aircon function there, it is quite good, but maybe not as extensive as conventional cars like the X70 for example, where almost everything uses buttons and dedicated physical controls. Of course, you would want that, but as far as Chinese EVs concerned, this is considered quite okay, because like I said just now, you got some shortcuts at the bottom of the screen here. So everything is quite within driver's reach, which is quite good. So overall, safety is not an issue. Ergonomics, as far as Chinese EV is concerned, this is considered quite okay. Of course, the most sensitive thing about new EV buyers is actually comes to battery and range. And let me tell you, for the EMAS 7 in this premium spec, the battery spec is quite decent as well. So for starters, it uses the same 60.22 kilowatt hour LFP AG's short blade battery pack, same as the Geely Galaxy E5, and according to Proton, this battery can give the EMAS 7 up to 410 km of WLTP maximum EV range, which is quite decent, and an energy consumption rate of about 14 to 18 kilowatt hour per 100 kilometers depending on the driving position. On paper, it looks quite fine, but once I use this car for quite a while, one thing I noticed is that despite it uses just a 400 volt battery architecture, the efficiency is quite good. I can easily get around 15 kilowatt hour per 100 kilometers even from daily driving. I mean, I'm not the slowest driver out there. I'm driving quite fast. So to get 15 kilowatt hour from this car is quite impressive, especially considering its size and weight, which is quite large compared to some of its smaller competitors. So as a result, I would say realistically you can get at least about 350 kilometers of range from the single battery. But if you use it for just strictly for daily, for urban commute, I think 400 kilometers out of full charge from the EMAS 7 is quite doable and possible. Okay, in terms of charging also, the EMAS 7 leads compared to some of its competitors because it comes with an 11 kilowatt AC charging and up to 100 kilowatt of DC fast charging. Compared to the Atto 3 and the Cherry Omada E5, this is a much better charging performance. So technically 30 to 80% DC charging going to take about 20 or 30 minutes. So meaning that long distance travel with the EMAS 7 here, if you can find 100 kilowatt DC charging, that shouldn't be a problem. But of course, this being Malaysia, our EV charging ecosystem is still okay, but not as extensive. So you still need to plan ahead when you want to use this car out of state. But overall, in terms of battery spec, it is one of the best in the segment, if not the best at this price segment. So good job, Proton. Alright, so in conclusion, you can see that of course the EMAS 7 didn't get as extensive of localization compared to the facelifted X70 here, but that does not necessarily bad because by itself also the EMAS 7 is a very stellar EV packed with all the function amenities you expect to find in any modern EV SUVs, let alone at this price point, because for the premium variant here, prices starts at only 123,800 ringgit, and that is before the special early bird package worth up to 4,000 ringgit. So in compared to the X70 Premium X here, the EMAS 7 is actually 3,000 ringgit cheaper because this thing retails at 126,800 ringgit. But regardless of your preference, whether you want EV or you want combustion power, both cars are actually quite a viable family SUV for you to have, so you cannot go wrong with either one of these. But for the EMAS 7, I have to say, even at this stage, it is quite complete. Dare I say this is the best entry-level EV you can buy in Malaysia today. So the only question we need to ask is, how will Proton respond to the EMAS 7 here?